hold down and break the back of inflation the way Reagan did.
Ronald Reagan had the political courage to take
right.
the pain.
His standings, his polls went way down.
Yeah, and everybody says, though, if you're going to have to do something like that, do it at the beginning of your administration
Absolutely.
rather than at the end.
That's right.
And
he did do it at the beginning. And by the time 83 and 2 or 3 came along, you set the stage for the really remarkable 20 years that have followed.
Why did you once say that the worst mistake Ronald Reagan ever made was selecting George Bush as his vice presidential running mate?
Because it was.
Well, no, that's not an answer. As you would say to your class, that's not an answer.
No, you're right. Because at the time, this is 1980, right. And remember we're talking about the first George Bush,
right.
Not the current one. In his campaign for the primary campaign for the presidential nomination, he dubbed economic policy voodoo economics.
Right.
He was against what Reagan wanted to do.
So-called supply-side economics and things like that.
That's right. He said that was voodoo economics, and it wouldn't work. And if we come to his administration, when he became president, he promised, he said,
read my
lips. But he ended up raising taxes.
But some will say that raising taxes is what contributed to the economic gains made during the Clinton administration, the 8 years of the Clinton administration.
On the contrary, those gains came in spite of having raised the taxes, not because of having raised the taxes.
You think Alan Greenspan, as I said, was the greatest Federal Reserve chairman ever?
Ever, that's right. The Federal Reserve was started in 1914, 1913, and there's been no chairman since who's had anything like as good an outcome.
Because he was a believer in the impact of monetary policy, and because he carefully calibrated interest rates and used monetary policy to keep a lid on inflation.
Absolutely, because he took the containing inflation as the chief task of the Fed. He didn't let him... See, the Fed got into trouble every time in the past. And the Fed has done... let me put it this way. In the first 75 years of its history, the Fed, on the average, was a major negative feature in the economy. We never would have had the Great Depression if there hadn't been a Fed. Since then, since 1982 or 3, the Fed has been a beneficiary for the economy. So that I had very seldom had anything good to say about the Fed before the 1980s. But since Alan Greenspan took over, I've had very little but good to say about
And what do you think of his successor?
I think his successor is a very able man, that he, like Greenspan, takes keeping stable prices as the major function of the Fed. And I have a good deal of confidence that he will continue in Alan Greenspan's path.
And what is his most important challenge? To do just that, to make sure that they keep a lid on inflation? Because it's rising in America.
Well, we have been having a little rising. It's a good. You can make a good argument that the Fed overdid easy money a little, that they kept the fund rate down at 1% a little too long, and you know it's a natural tendency that you overdo things. You almost never go right along like this. You go up, you go too far.
Well, is it hard to calibrate it as well as you might want to?
Very hard to.
And that's his genius. That was Greenspan's genius, and that's the kind of genius that Bernanke has to have.
I think that he'll have his successor, Ben Bernanke, will have the same effect.
Well, he's a big fan of yours too.
Well,
we'll forgive him for that. All right.
I can't blame him for that. I don't hold that against him.
You mentioned immigration. You're an immigrant.
Yeah, my parents
were an immigrant. Yeah, you were born in 1912. They came here.
Yeah,
they came here from
they came here from what was Hungary when they came here.
Yeah.
But it was Hungary then. It was later Czechoslovakia. It is now the Ukraine.
Some worry that in the aftermath of 9/11, two things are happening. One is that we're keeping out some people that could really contribute to the American economy and the American way of life in the way that your parents did and you have and your kids have.
I think that's true. I think the immigration problem is a very difficult problem, and there's no easy answer to it. at the time my parents came, the U.S. had completely free immigration. It had come in from all over the world.
Right.
You can have that, and we should have it if you did not have a welfare state. If you have a welfare state, and you have welfare arrangements, so that people come for, well, not necessarily for to make a living, not necessarily the way our parents and your great-grandparents did, because they saw better opportunity here. But if they come to feed on the state, as it were, you cannot have completely free immigration. In principle, I'd like to see free immigration, but you can't do it in a welfare state.
Are you more libertarian than you are Republican?
I always say I am Republican with a capital R and libertarian with a small L.
All right. I want to talk about some big questions here beyond the specifics. You think this American economy is in good shape? You think the dollars can continue to be strong? You think the productivity and the American economic model is still to be the most admired in the world? You think the economic machine that is America continues to be strong? You're not worried about whatever shift that might be taking place to Asia? You think that's good because it'll make for a more competitive environment? All of that is where you are.
That's right.
And you have never seen a tax cut you don't like.
Right.
Right? And there's way too much government spending and way too much government power, even for your taste, still in 2005.
Absolutely.
All right. Did you win the great intellectual battle? You, as sort of coming out of Chicago, and the conflict with, say, John Kenneth Galbraith in the area of sort of public intellectuals, and the conservative movement. Did you win that great struggle that began, say, with you and then Barry Goldwater and then Ronald Reagan and continues through George Bush, 43?
We won it, sure, in the intellectual realm.
Because you made what was a minority position the acceptable position.
It's the acceptable position in words,
yes,
but not in practice. And moreover, the fall of the Berlin Wall did more than any books that I or anybody else has written to persuade people that that was not the way to run an economy. Look at what's happened to the, asking about the intellect, whether we won the position. Socialism used to be defined, it's defined today in any dictionary, as government ownership of the ownership and operation of the means of production. Does anybody believe that anymore?
That's the definition of socialism, or
that's what
or that's a better system. I don't think anybody believes that's a better system.
Anybody believe that that's a better system?
Yeah, Fidel Castro, but who else?
Very few.
Right.
Right. Is there any?
Nobody in Russia believes it.
Nobody in Russia believes it, and Russia isn't run that way anymore. Yeah. There's no country in the world that is run that way, except for
Fidel Castro,
North Korea.
North Korea and Venezuela, maybe.
Well, Venezuela not yet, but it's on the way.
All right.
So in that sense, we've won the intellectual battle. On the other hand, if you look at practice, what do you observe around the world? That in this respect, practice has improved enormously in the countries that were formerly under the Soviet Union. That it's improved enormously in East Asia, with South Korea, with China, and with others. But if you look at the West, what used to be called the West, if you look at practice has improved in Britain, but if you look at the continent, Germany, France, Italy, at the United
social
States,
model is of a